Let's talk TSM, J&T.
You're back,
My
baby.
God. Okay, so just real quick, the Sports Business Journal. There's the guy. His name is Kevin. What's his name? Kevin Hitt. I'll just read the first sentence. It
With two
says
T's.
TSM. Yeah, TSM will be pausing most of its esports efforts in several titles and maybe putting its League of Legends Championship Series franchise on the block. Now, this is big news, but it's maybe not as big of news as it should be. Like, how significant is this, JT? Because if this happened 5 or 6 years ago, this is an absolute nightmare. But I have to bring up the question: what does TSM bring to this league anymore that other teams don't?
Yeah, it's weird because I think we've had two separate instances in the past now where we hear the idea potentially floating around that TSM could exist outside of the LCS. However, those rumors, if we want to even call it that, haven't really amounted to anything. But when you look at this specifically with the Sports Business Journal article that came out, with Travis talking about it, with a lot of former pro players going on their co-stream saying they also have, some info about this. This feels way more real than the previous, rumors that we might have heard about TSM potentially exiting the LCS. This feels, like it actually has something behind it. So obviously
I want to
TSM, oh, sorry, go ahead if you want to.
Well, I just want to reiterate. So last week we talked about them getting rid of a bunch of management, and I got to give you credit, JT. Pat yourself on the back here because you said like instantly this might be the end of LCS or TSM in the LCS. Now, I don't think anybody thought that it would happen a week after or in the middle of the year, right? There's still summer split that's yet to happen, but you did call it, so give yourself a pat on the back there. But I just got to get back to the significance of this. TSM doesn't really try to win anymore, right? Like, no offense to their current roster, but I don't think TSM put that roster together to win a championship. I think they put that roster together because they didn't have to pay them very much, right? So that's what I think. And speaking of not paying them very much, as per the Travis Gafford video, he seems to indicate that the rumor is TSM approached their players and said, you have to take minimum salary or we're going to replace you, or not verbatim, by the way. I'm lost on the exact words that he used, but it sounds like TSM is only willing to pay 75K, which is the league minimum, to all of their players next split, which I don't even know if they're allowed to do that. Like, I don't know what the contracts look like, but that sounds shady as hell, no?
Yeah, first of all, as you mentioned, it sounds super shady. Just the fact that some or a player could have their contract, their value changed in the middle of the year. Obviously, I mean, I feel like we've talked about this a million times now. The LCS needs to make their contracts public, and I feel like that should be a norm across, the entire league ecosystem because we do really have to do a lot of guesswork here when it comes to talking about player contracts. But presumably, when players sign contracts, they are for the whole year, not necessarily split to split. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is not the case. Maybe contracts are you're paid out on a split to split basis. However, the fact that TSM needs to approach their players and say, "Hey, you have 24 hours to accept the minimum," obviously indicates that, to back to our original point, TSM is definitely trying to separate themselves from the LCS. Travis even said within his video, one of the things that one of the things that he has heard is that TSM is trying to change their relationship with Riot Games in the LCS. And hearing that kind of language heavily indicates to them potentially exiting the LCS.
So I still think though, like, I don't think there's a good excuse for them paying the players minimum, and I'll tell you why. Because Reggie recently put out a tweet that they're looking to get into CS:GO, which is not cheap. So how do you have money to get a CS:GO team, but you don't have money to pay your players the contract that they sign? If there's other information that I'm missing here, by all means, let me know. But that sounds like absolute garbage to not pay your players if you have the cash to go after a CS roster. No.
And I mean, kind of even the crazier part is the fact that they let go of four high ranking, people on their management team, and yet they still also have to ask for their players to take a pay cut. So I feel like this whole thing comes back to the FTX deal that TSM signed, 2 years ago, where it was that 10-year, $210 million naming rights contract that was obviously like one of the biggest contracts in esports history, that there was a lot of attention brought to that. And obviously, as everybody in the world knows, with the collapse of FTX in like mid-November, it feels like a lot of this is timing up quite well with that news of FTX collapsing, because presumably TSM was going to have access to a shit ton of money within that contract to be able to operate their various esports teams, players, management, and whatnot. Now, not having that, I think we're kind of seeing the fat being snipped off, if you will.
Yeah, and the thing is, they also still said that they're still profitable and blah 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 blah. But something's not adding up here. No way. There's no way you can tell me you lose the 210 million, and then you say we're gonna pay our players 75K or less. Oh, but we're also going after a CS roster, and the rumor is they might have been looking into a CB LOL team. Like this, no man, it's not adding up. There's going to be more information coming out about this, and we will definitely talk about it when it does, but this stuff is not adding up at all. Now, I also think let's talk about the future of TSM, because last year we had a video or a whole episode where we talked about TSM possibly going to the LEC. I just mentioned how it's possible that they were looking to join the CB LOL, but I have to ask, like, what are the chances that they get into those leagues? Like, let's say they're able to sell their LCS spot and they're able to maybe buy a CB LOL or LEC slot. Would the commissioners not block that sale from happening? Like, do they have the power to do that? And the reason I bring that up is because I don't expect the LEC commissioner to forget that, hey, by the way, Reggie is on probation for abusing players. And also, if things seem to go south in the LCS, they just tell their players, like, yeah, we're not going to pay you as much as your contract was anymore. Like, does TSM just expect the LEC to be like, oh, I'm sure it's fine, no problems there?
My best guess as to what could potentially happen if TSM existed outside of the LCS is that instead of them entering a league as themselves, it would most likely be, some sort of joint venture or them buying or purchasing a different words, a different team slot in any league, whether that's CBLOL, LPL, LEC. So I think it's highly unlikely that TSM would enter a different league as TSM itself. If they were to enter as TSM, I would assume it'd be some sort of joint venture, potentially similar to the Koi Rogue thing that we saw over in the LEC over this past offseason, or acquiring and purchasing and basically buying out an entire different org and then taking that over from whichever league they could choose to join. Because
But here's the sorry to cut you off, but here's the problem with that is, like, who wants to team up with TSM right now? We heard a
I,
week ago or whatever that Reggie plans on being more hands-on. Who's gonna join an adventure with that guy? And like I said, aren't the LEC or CB Law commissioners gonna stop that sale? Don't they have the power to do that?
I'm just telling you what the options are, dog.
Please, anyone, please feel free to let me know if that's not possible. I just don't see a world where that happens. Now, Counter-Strike, not my area of expertise whatsoever. So maybe they can buy a Counter-Strike team and participate in whatever tournament as long as they qualify. I don't know. I just know from, like, for the LEC specifically, they're franchised, right? They
Yeah.
franchised a few years back.
Hmm.
I don't see a world where the LEC commissioner is like, oh yeah, this is fine. You know that team where the owner is on probation for abusing players? Not a problem. We'll look the other way. Oh, and you know how, like, if once things didn't start to go well, they just decided to stop paying their players. Yeah, that's not a problem. No problem here. Like, it just seems like an absolute disaster of a decision. So I don't know. I think TSM's putting the, what is it, the cart before the horse or whatever. I don't know.